The discovery on Morro do Vintém. They were not found buried. They were not hidden. They were not running. They were waiting. On a windswept hill overlooking the Brazilian city of Niterói, two men lay side by side. Their bodies showed no signs of struggle, no visible injuries, no blood, no evidence of violence. Their clothes were neatly pressed, their shoes polished, as if they had dressed carefully for something important, and covering their eyes were crude masks made of lead. This was not an accident scene. At IT was not a robbery. At IT did not look like murder. At IT looked like preparation. On August 20th, 1966, a local boy flying a kite near Morro do Vintém noticed something strange among the rocks. At first, it appeared to be discarded clothing. But as he moved closer, the shape became unmistakable. Two human bodies. By the time police arrived, the scene had already begun to attract attention. Officers were met with an image that would haunt Brazilian criminal history for decades. The men were lying on their backs, positioned deliberately. Each wore a simple suit. Each had a notebook in his pocket, and each had a heavy lead mask placed carefully over his face, covering only the eyes, not the mouth. There was no sign of panic, only intention. A scene without answers. The hill itself was isolated, but not remote. From its peak, one could see parts of the city below. It was a place locals visited for quiet reflection, not danger. No reports of screams, no witnesses, no emergency calls. The men had died days earlier, yet decomposition was minimal. No animals had disturbed them, almost as if something or someone had ensured they would not be touched. Police immediately searched for weapons. None were found. They searched for poison. None detected. They searched for identification. That was when the notebooks were discovered. The note that changed everything. Inside one of the men's pockets was a small notebook. On its pages, written in careful, deliberate handwriting, were instructions. Not a diary. Not a confession. Instructions. The final lines read, 16:30 at the agreed place. 18:30 ingest capsules. After effect, protect metals, wait for mask signal. No explanation, no signature, no hint of fear. Only a plan. Who were they? The men were identified as Manoel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana, both electronics technicians from the nearby town of Campos dos Goitacazes. They were not criminals. They were not drifters. They were not mentally institutionalized. They were skilled professionals who worked with radios, circuits, and electrical equipment. Quiet men, methodical, known to believe in scientific experimentation. And in something else. Something their families rarely spoke about. The masks. The lead masks were crude, roughly cut, heavy, and uncomfortable. They offered no protection from gas, no breathing apparatus, no eye holes. They did not resemble industrial safety equipment. They resembled ritual objects. Why lead? Lead blocks radiation. Lead shields against electromagnetic waves. Lead protects from things you cannot see. The capsules. The note mentioned capsules. No capsules were found at the scene. No residue. No containers. No toxins detected in their blood. Although testing methods in 1966 were limited, police could not determine what they ingested. Or if they ingested anything at all. A case that refused to behave. Every assumption investigators made collapsed under scrutiny. Of suicide. Why two men, days apart, in identical positions? If accident, why the masks, the note, the precision? If murder, why no struggle, no wounds, no motive? And why would a killer carefully place lead masks over the victim's eyes? Something was missing. As the investigation expanded, police learned something unsettling. The men had traveled to Niterói days earlier. They had withdrawn a significant sum of money. They had told relatives they would be gone briefly for work. They never returned, and no one could explain what work required lead masks, timed capsules, and a hilltop rendezvous. The silence after. The case quickly attracted national attention. Newspapers speculated wildly. secret experiments, foreign agents, cult rituals, even extraterrestrial contact. Police denied everything. Then slowly, the investigation stalled. Files were misplaced. Witnesses stopped being interviewed. Leads went cold, and Morro do Vintém returned to silence. But the question remained, unchanged since 1966. What were the men waiting for? Who were the men? Before the lead masks, before the hill, before the silence, Manoel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana lived. Ordinary lives, the kind that rarely attract attention, rarely leave records, and almost never end up in national headlines. That ordinariness is what made the case disturbing. Because nothing about who they were suggested how they died. Two technicians from nowhere important. Manoel Pereira de Cruz was 32 years old. Miguel José Viana was 34. They lived in Campos dos Goitacazes, a modest industrial town north of Rio de Janeiro. It was not a place known for innovation or secrets. It was a place where people worked, married, aged, and disappeared quietly. Both men worked as electronics technicians. In the 1960s, that profession carried a particular meaning. Electronics was not yet consumer level. It wasn't phones and laptops. It was radios, transmitters, signal receivers, experimental circuits. Knowledge passed through manuals, military surplus parts, and self-taught experimentation. Electronics technicians were tinkerers, builders, men who understood invisible forces, signals, frequencies, waves, things you could not see, but could measure, manipulate, and sometimes fear. Not close friends, but bound by something else. Despite being frequently described as friends, investigators later discovered something important. Manoel and Miguel were not childhood friends. They did not grow up together. They did not share family ties. Their connection was technical and ideological. They met through work, through electronic circles, and through a loosely organized group of men fascinated by scientific experimentation mixed with spiritual belief. This distinction matters. They were not emotionally dependent on one another. They were collaborators. Quiet men, precise habits. Family members described both men in similar terms. Quiet, disciplined, introverted to methodical. Neither drank excessively. Neither had a criminal history. Neither displayed violent tendencies. But there were subtle details that only emerged after their deaths. Both men kept notebooks filled with calculations, diagrams, and coded notes. Not professional blueprints, personal records. Some entries referenced frequencies. Others referenced dates and times. Many entries made no immediate sense, even to fellow technicians. It wasn't madness, it was obsession, belief in scientific contact. Friends later told police something that was initially dismissed. Manoel and Miguel believed it was possible to establish contact with non-human intelligences through scientific means. Not prayer. Not seances. Technology. They believed certain electromagnetic frequencies could open communication windows, that the human brain could be shielded, tuned, and prepared. This belief was not unique in 1960s Brazil. Brazil in the 1960s. A fertile ground for strange ideas. The 1960s were a volatile decade in Brazil. The political instability and military influence, rapid technological change, widespread interest in UFOs and paranormal research. Radio culture was massive. Amateur radio operators, known as radio hams, formed underground communities that shared equipment, signals, and rumors. Stories circulated of strange transmissions, voices without sources, signals repeating impossible patterns. To most, it was noise. To a few, it was proof. The group no one wanted to name. Police eventually learned that Manoel and Miguel were connected to a small, informal group of men who believed humanity was on the verge of a technological spiritual breakthrough. The group had no official name, NO headquarters, NO records. Members met privately, often in workshops or back rooms, discussing experiments that blended electronics, radiation shielding, consciousness expansion, contact theories. This was not a cult in the traditional sense. No leader, no hierarchy. Just shared belief. And shared secrecy. Why secrecy? Because many of their ideas bordered on the illegal or at least the dangerous. They experimented with homemade electronic devices, high-voltage components, unknown chemical compounds, protective materials like lead. Lead was expensive, hard to work with, yet both men had access to it and knew how to shape it. The masks weren't random. Family members initially believed the lead masks were absurd. Investigators did not. For electronics technicians obsessed with radiation and signals, lead had meaning: lead blocks, ionizing radiation, certain electromagnetic interference, external signal exposure. Covering the eyes specifically suggests something else: protection of sensory input. As if the men feared not physical harm, but perception itself. Financial clues that went nowhere. Days before traveling to Niterói, the men withdrew a noticeable amount of money. Not enough to flee. Enough to fund something. They bought tools, clothing, supplies, but no one could confirm what supplies. Receipts were missing. The money was never recovered, the journey that shouldn't have happened. Their trip to Niterói was poorly explained. They told relatives they were traveling for work, but neither had clients there, neither had contracts, and neither packed for an extended stay. They traveled light. Purposeful. As if they already knew where they were going. And when. No fear, no hesitation. Perhaps the most unsettling detail emerged from witnesses who saw them shortly before their deaths. They appeared calm. Not excited, not anxious, not rushed. One shop owner later recalled that one of the men checked his watch repeatedly, not nervously, but attentively. As if timing mattered more than anything else. The absence of doubt. In suicide cases, investigators often find hesitation. Letters, apologies, confessions. Here, there was none. No farewell messages. No emotional preparation. Only instructions. That absence suggests something terrifying. They did not believe they were going to die. A psychological profile that didn't fit. Psychologists consulted years later reached a rare consensus. Manoel and Miguel did not display traits consistent with mass delusion, shared psychosis, despair-driven suicide. They were rational men operating under an incorrect assumption, not unstable men acting irrationally. That distinction changes everything. The question no one could answer: if these men were intelligent, methodical, and calm, if they believed they were conducting an experiment, if they protected their eyes with lead, then what did they expect to see, or hear, or experience? And why did they believe Morro do Vintém was the place where it would happen? By the end of Part 2, 1, conclusion becomes unavoidable. Whatever happened on that hill was planned, intentional, and based on belief, not panic, not crime, not coincidence. And the belief did not come from madness. It came from confidence. The lead masks. They were not medical devices. They were not industrial safety equipment. They were not designed for comfort, visibility, or survival. They were designed for exposure. And that distinction is critical. Objects that should not exist. At first glance, the lead masks looked crude, almost laughable. 2 roughly cut pieces of thick lead, bent by hand, shaped to cover only the eyes. No straps, no padding, no ventilation. They were held in place simply by resting on the face. This alone told investigators something important. These masks were not meant to be worn for long periods. They were meant to be worn at a specific moment. Why only the eyes? If protection from gas, poison, or fumes was the goal, covering only the eyes would be useless. If protection from radiation was the goal, why leave the rest of the body exposed? Unless the threat was not physical. Unless the danger was perceptual. The eyes are the primary gateway of sensory overload. Bright flashes, sudden light, unknown visual stimuli. In the 1960s, reports of UFO encounters often described blinding light, temporary blindness, visual distortion. Manoel and Miguel were aware of these reports. They collected them. Lead and the fear of radiation. Lead has one primary symbolic and practical use: shielding. Not against knives, not against bullets, against invisible energy, radiation, X-rays, gamma rays, electromagnetic interference. To a technician obsessed with signals, lead is not superstition. It is logic. But logic applied to the wrong assumption. The masks as filters, not barriers. Investigators made a crucial mistake early on. They assumed the masks were meant to block something entirely. Later analysis suggested something more disturbing. What if the masks were meant to filter, not block? By covering only the eyes, the men may have believed they could reduce visual overload, protect against harmful light frequencies, allow perception without damage. This mirrors theories circulating in fringe scientific circles at the time, theories suggesting that certain entities or phenomena could only be perceived safely through partial sensory deprivation. Not blindness, controlled exposure. The absence of straps was intentional. The masks had no straps. No ties. No fasteners. That means the men could remove them instantly. This was not surrender. It was readiness. If something went wrong, the masks could be dropped. But they never were. The weight of the masks. Lead is heavy, uncomfortable. Wearing even a small piece against the face causes strain. This reinforces the idea that the masks were intended for a short, critical window of time. A moment, a signal, a flash. The notebook instructions revisited. The note found on one of the men read, "After effect, protect metals, wait for mask signal." This line has been misunderstood for decades. Protect metals may refer to shielding electronic components. Or protecting the body from metallic interference. But wait for mask signal is the key phrase. The masks were not passive. They were part of a sequence, a protocol. The timeline suggests anticipation. The instructions included exact times: point 16:30, arrival point 18:30, ingestion of capsules. This suggests synchronization. Not between the two men, but with something external. A known window. A predicted event. A signal expected at a precise time. Why lead, not steel? Steel was cheaper, easier to shape. But steel does not shield radiation effectively. Lead does. And the men knew that. They deliberately chose a material associated with nuclear safety, not industrial work. This was not ignorance. This was intention. No other protective gear. There were no gloves. No suits. No helmets. No breathing apparatus, which means they did not fear airborne toxins, temperature, physical impact. They feared one thing: exposure. The masks were identical but not mass-produced. Both masks were similar but not identical. Hand-cut. Slight variations. This indicates they were made by the men themselves, not ordered, and not standardized. Each mask was shaped for its wearer. A personal object. Ritual without religion. Despite how it appears, there was no religious symbolism. No prayers. No icons. No chants recorded. This was not faith. It was procedure. A ritual, yes, but a technical one. Like powering on a machine. The most overlooked detail: the masks covered the eyes, not the ears. If the men feared sound, they did nothing to block it, which suggests they expected to hear something. A tone. A frequency. A voice. This aligns with reports from amateur radio circles of unexplained auditory phenomena. Why leave the mouth uncovered? The mouth remained exposed. They could breathe freely, speak, react. If something appeared, they could communicate, which means they did not expect paralysis. They expected interaction. The masks were found in place. This is crucial. The masks were not found nearby. They were not dropped. They were not removed. They were still positioned correctly over the eyes, which means whatever happened after the masks were put on and before they could be taken off. Not protection, preparation. The most unsettling conclusion investigators eventually reached was this: the lead masks were not designed to save the men. They were designed to prepare them for something they believed was coming, something they believed could be safely experienced if approached correctly. The question the masks ask. The masks do not ask, Who killed them? They ask something far worse. What did they expect to see? And more importantly, what did they actually experience, if anything at all? The timeline that makes no sense. If the lead masks were the symbol, the timeline was the trap. Because once investigators attempted to reconstruct what actually happened between the men leaving home and their deaths on Morro do Vintém, the case stopped behaving like reality. Events overlapped. Times contradicted each other. Entire windows of time disappeared without explanation. And the deeper the reconstruction went, the less human the sequence felt. Day 1. Departure without urgency. On August 17, 1966, Manoel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana left Campos dos Goitacazes. They did not flee. They did not hurry. They boarded public transportation during daylight hours, carrying only small bags. Witnesses later recalled nothing unusual, except one detail. They asked about timing, not directions, not distance. Time. The money withdrawal. Earlier that day, both men withdrew money from a local bank. The amount was modest but specific, enough to cover transport, food, and supplies. Not enough to relocate, not enough to disappear. The money was never recovered, which means it was spent on something no one could identify. Arrival in Niterói. They arrived in Niterói in the afternoon. Hotel staff later confirmed they rented a room. They did not appear nervous. They did not appear secretive. They signed in with their real names. This matters? People planning crimes or escape use aliases. People planning procedures do not. The first missing hours. Here is where time begins to fracture. The men checked into their hotel and then vanished from all records. No witnesses. No receipts. No confirmed sightings. For nearly 24 hours, their movements are unknown. No one knows where they went. Or what they did. The weather problem. Meteorological records show that the area experienced heavy rain during this period. The hill where they were later found would have been difficult, even dangerous, to access during a storm, and yet, their clothes were clean. Their shoes were not muddy. There were no signs of slipping, falling, or struggle, which means they likely went to the hill after the rain stopped. But the timing doesn't allow for that. The note versus reality. The note stated, 16:30 at the agreed place. 18:30 ingest capsules. But the bodies were discovered on August 20. Medical estimates place time of death at least 2 days earlier, which creates an impossible overlap. If they followed the schedule on the 18th, why were they still alive after? If they followed it on the 19th, why was the note written earlier? Unless the note wasn't written that day. Unless it was written in advance, the capsules that don't exist. The timeline assumes ingestion of capsules at 18:30, but no capsules were found. NO residue, NO packaging, NO chemical traces consistent with known substances of the time. Either the capsules dissolved completely, the capsules were not chemical, or the capsules were never ingested. Each option breaks a different law of logic. The absence of biological evidence. Autopsies revealed no clear cause of death. No poison, no trauma, no suffocation. In 1966, forensic science was limited but not blind. Doctors could identify common toxins. They found none, which means either the cause was extremely rare or not biological at all. The hill that refuses to cooperate, Morro do Vintém, is not isolated wilderness. It is accessible. Which raises another question. Why was no one else there? No hikers. No locals. No passersby. And yet the men reached the summit, positioned themselves carefully, and died without interruption. As if the hill was empty only for them. The bodies' position, they were lying side by side. Aligned. Not slumped. Not collapsed. Not panicked. This was not a moment of sudden death. This was waiting. The decomposition anomaly. The state of the bodies confused medical examiners. Decomposition suggested death earlier than expected, but not enough to explain the timeline. Some processes appeared delayed, others accelerated. This inconsistency was quietly noted and then ignored. The watch that still worked. One of the men wore a wristwatch. It was still functioning when the bodies were found. The time displayed did not match the official estimated time of death, which suggests the watch stopped later. But there was no explanation why. The missing evening, between 1830 and midnight, there is nothing. No witnesses, no noise, no disturbance, no phone calls, no sightings. 2 men simply ceased to interact with the world. The problem investigators couldn't solve that if the men died instantly, why no cause? If they died slowly, why no signs of distress? If they were waiting, what were they waiting for? And why did it arrive without leaving a trace? Time as the silent participant. As weeks passed, detectives began referring to the case as the one with no clock, because every attempt to anchor events to real time failed. Not because evidence was missing, but because evidence contradicted itself. The case begins to rot. Faced with an impossible sequence, investigators did what institutions often do. They simplified. They labeled it an unexplained death. They archived the contradictions. They moved on. But the timeline refused to stay buried, because it suggested something deeply uncomfortable, that Manoel and Miguel were not operating on human time. They were synchronizing with something else, something predictable to them, but invisible to everyone else. In next part, we examine what happened after the discovery, the failed investigation, the lost files, the ignored witnesses, and the quiet institutional retreat that ensured this case would never be solved. Failed investigations and police blind spots. By the time authorities realized they were not dealing with a normal death, it was already too late. Because the greatest failure in the lead masks case did not happen on Morro do Vintém. It happened after in offices. In reports. In decisions never officially recorded. A case that made police uncomfortable. From the beginning, investigators sensed something was wrong. Not criminally wrong, structurally wrong. There was no suspect to chase. No motive to profile. No weapon to trace. Every standard investigative tool failed. And when systems fail, institutions retreat. The first assumption: double suicide. The easiest explanation was suicide. 2 men. Remote hill. Unusual behavior. Case closed. But the evidence refused to cooperate. No poison. No note of despair. No hesitation behavior. No known suicidal tendencies. Even the officers who proposed suicide admitted privately, "It doesn't feel like it." Still, suicide remained the official direction, because no alternative existed. Witness statements that went nowhere. Several witnesses reported seeing the men days before their estimated time of death. One shopkeeper recalled selling them water and snacks. Another claimed they asked about the best time to reach the hill. These statements were logged and never followed up. No timeline reconciliation, no location tracking. The contradictions were inconvenient, so they were ignored. The electronics angle was abandoned early. Initially, investigators showed interest in the men's profession. They questioned colleagues. They examined workshops. They collected notebooks. Then abruptly, they stopped. Why? Because nothing illegal was found, and nothing they found could be understood by non-specialists. Police lacked the technical literacy to interpret frequency diagrams, calculations, experimental notes. So instead of consulting experts, they shelved the material. The group that was never officially investigated. The informal circle the men belonged to was known. Names were mentioned, meetings were described. Yet no group member was formally charged, interrogated, or surveilled. Not one. Why? Because there was no crime to attach. And no authority wanted responsibility for probing fringe beliefs during a politically sensitive era. Brazil's political climate played a role. In 1966, Brazil was under military influence. Public panic was dangerous. UFOs, secret experiments, radiation deaths. These were not narratives the state wanted circulating. So the case was framed narrowly, quietly. Technically. Files began to disappear. Years later, journalists attempting to review the case noticed something odd. Documents referenced in early reports were missing, witness statements mentioned, but absent, lab results cited but not archived. This was not a dramatic cover-up. It was bureaucratic decay. Neglect, which is often more effective. The autopsy reports that raised questions. Medical examiners privately admitted uncertainty. They could not determine cause of death. They could not rule out exotic toxins. They could not explain the physiological inconsistencies. Yet no second autopsy was ordered. No independent review. No escalation. Because admitting ignorance creates liability, the lead masks were never properly analyzed. The masks were catalogued as objects of unknown purpose. That was it. No metallurgical testing, no residue analysis, no attempt to reconstruct their use. Today, that omission is unforgivable. At the time, it was convenient. The hill was not secured. Morro do Vintém was not sealed off. No perimetered. No controlled access. Locals continued visiting the site, which means potential evidence was destroyed. Environmental traces were altered. The scene was compromised almost immediately. An irreversible loss. The press became the real investigators. As police interest faded, journalists filled the void. Newspapers speculated wildly. UFO cult. Espionage gone wrong. Experimental suicide. Some reporters interviewed acquaintances police never contacted. Others uncovered patterns investigators ignored. But journalism has limits. It cannot subpoena silence. The case was closed without being solved. Eventually, the case was officially closed as an unexplained death. Not homicide. Not suicide. Not accident. Just unexplained. Which is not a conclusion. It is an abdication. The most damaging blind spot. The greatest failure was conceptual. Police treated the case as something that happened to the men. They never seriously considered that the men may have believed they were participants, that they were not victims of an event, but volunteers in a process they trusted. Once that possibility is ignored, everything else collapses. Why no one reopened it years later? New investigators occasionally reviewed the file. Each time, the same conclusion was reached. Too many gaps, too much missing data, too many dead witnesses. The case had decayed past recovery. A case that teaches nothing. Officially in police training, the lead masks case is rarely mentioned. Because it offers no lessons. No techniques. No closure. It is an embarrassment. But unofficially, among investigators and researchers, it became something else. A warning that not all mysteries fail because they are hidden. Some fail because institutions refuse to look where answers might exist. In next part, we cross the line investigators avoided and examine the theories, not casually, not sensationally, but systematically. From science to cult psychology to espionage to the one theory everyone denies discussing out loud. Theories. Science, cults, espionage, UFOs. When evidence collapses, theories rush in to fill the vacuum. Most are noise. Some are desperate. A few are dangerous. But in the lead masks case, theories weren't born from imagination alone. They were forced into existence by the failure of every conventional explanation. To understand what might have happened on Morro do Vintém, each theory must be examined not for how strange it sounds, but for how well it survives contact with facts. Theory 1. A scientific experiment gone wrong. This is the most restrained theory and the one closest to official acceptance. That Manoel and Miguel were conducting an unauthorized experiment involving sensory deprivation, electromagnetic exposure, chemical ingestion, and that something went catastrophically wrong. At first glance, this explanation appears reasonable. They were technicians. They believed in scientific contact. They prepared equipment. They followed a procedure. But the details betray it. The problem with the science theory that no experimental apparatus was found, no antennas, no transmitters, no receivers, no power sources, that if this was an experiment, it was incomplete. And if it relied on external equipment, where was it? Removed. Afterward? By whom? And why leave the bodies but take the tools? The capsule problem returns. A scientific experiment implies controlled substances. Yet no known compound could Kill two men simultaneously, leave no detectable trace, produce no visible distress. Even experimental drugs of the era do not fit. Unless the capsule wasn't chemical. Unless it was something else entirely. Theory 2. Cult ritual or occult belief. This theory gained traction in the press. 2 Men. Ritual objects. Timed instructions. A remote location. Classic markers. But once again, the facts refuse cooperation. Why this was not a cult. There was no doctrine. No leader. No repeated ritual. No symbolic sacrifice. No one else died. No one tried again. Cults replicate behavior. This never happened again. Which suggests this was not belief for belief's sake, but belief tied to a specific moment. Theory 3. A coordinated suicide pact. Authorities quietly favored this explanation. It allowed closure without confrontation. But suicide theories collapse under scrutiny. Suicide without despair. There were no emotional markers. No depression. No farewell letters. No personal goodbyes. And most importantly, no hesitation. Psychologists agree. Even planned suicides show doubt. These men showed none. Because they did not believe they were dying. Theory 4. Espionage or military experimentation. This theory surfaced briefly, then vanished. 2 Electronics technicians. Strange equipment. Radiation shielding. A politically tense it sounded plausible. Until investigators asked the wrong question. Why espionage makes no sense. If this were intelligence related, there would be handlers. There would be surveillance. There would be retrieval. No intelligence agency leaves bodies with unexplained masks on a public hill. Too visible. Too uncontrolled. And no classified program would rely on handwritten notes and homemade masks. This theory dies quickly. Theory 5. Exposure to a natural phenomenon. Some researchers proposed ball lightning, atmospheric plasma, rare electromagnetic storms. Brazil's geography allows for strange electrical activity. Could the men have been exposed to something unknown? Possibly. But again, no burns. No marks. No environmental damage. Nature leaves signatures. This left none. Theory 6. The UFO hypothesis, the one no one wants to touch. This theory was dismissed publicly but whispered privately. And not because it was absurd. Because it explained too much. Why the UFO theory refuses to die. Consider the alignment. Obsession with electromagnetic contact. A belief in non-human intelligence. Lead shielding over the eyes. Precise timing. The remote elevated location. These align disturbingly well with reported contact protocols described in UFO literature of the time, and the men were aware of those reports. They studied them. Not abduction. Contact. Important distinction. No signs of struggle. No missing bodies. No trauma. If something occurred, it was not forced. It was anticipated. Which means if an encounter happened, it was not an abduction. It was an appointment. The mask signal. Wait for mask signal. What signal? Light. Sound. Radiation spike. Many UFO reports describe blinding flashes, sudden loss of consciousness, temporal distortion. Lead masks would protect the eyes from sudden light exposure, but not the brain, which raises a terrifying possibility. Death by miscalculation. If the men believed contact required exposure to a phenomenon and misjudged its intensity, then death could occur without violence, without poison, without struggle, instantly. Why no trace was left. If the event was brief, localized, non-material, there may be nothing left to find. No footprints. No debris. No radiation detectable. Days later, just 2 men who reached the limit of what their preparation allowed. The most disturbing consistency. The UFO theory is disturbing not because it invokes the unknown, but because it aligns with the men's behavior. They acted like people expecting something extraordinary, not like people fleeing reality. Why authorities rejected it? Not because it was impossible, but because it was unmanageable. Admitting uncertainty is one thing. Admitting contact, even accidental, is another. The final theory, the one that includes all others. Some researchers now believe the truth lies between categories. Not UFOs as spacecraft. Not cults as religion. But human belief intersecting with misunderstood phenomena, men who believed technology could open doors, and walked through one that didn't lead back. That in Part 7, we examine what was never officially recorded, the witness testimonies, anomalies, and quiet details that didn't fit any theory, and were therefore erased. What was never officially recorded. Every investigation has two versions. The one that exists on paper, and the one that survives in fragments, in memories, whispers, margins, and omissions. The lead masks case is defined not by what was documented, but by what never was. Because when evidence doesn't fit any acceptable explanation, it doesn't get solved. It gets erased. The witnesses who were unreliable. In the weeks following the discovery, several locals came forward with statements. Not dramatic ones. Not sensational ones. Quiet observations. They were dismissed almost immediately. The man who heard something. One resident living near Morro do Vintém claimed that on the evening believed to coincide with the men's deaths, he heard a low humming sound. Not thunder, not machinery, not an aircraft, a sustained vibration that lasted less than a minute. He didn't see anything, only felt it. His statement was logged, marked as environmental noise, and never revisited. The woman who saw light, without source, another witness reported, seeing a brief flash of light over the hill late at night. Not a beam, not an explosion. A sudden illumination, like daylight and then darkness again. She assumed it was lightning, but meteorological records show no lightning activity at that time. Her statement was classified as misinterpretation. The children who refused to go back. In the months after the incident, several children from the area reportedly refused to play near the hill. Parents dismissed it as imagination. But one detail stood out. They didn't describe fear. They described discomfort. If the place felt wrong. No investigation followed. The medical detail that was never explained. One medical examiner reportedly noted something unusual. The men's pupils were not dilated as expected, nor constricted. They were neutral. As if the nervous system had shut down instantly. This observation never appeared in the final report. The missing pages. When journalists later requested access to the notebooks found on the men, they discovered something alarming. Several pages were missing. Not torn out violently, removed. Cleanly. No record of who removed them. No explanation for when. The remaining pages contained calculations, but no conclusions. As if the final steps had been deliberately taken away. The electronics that were seen, then gone. Two witnesses claimed they saw the men carrying metallic objects shortly before heading toward the hill. Not heavy, not large, but purposeful. By the time police searched the area, nothing was found. No explanation was offered. The autopsy silence. Privately, one doctor expressed concern that the deaths might involve neurological shutdown, something that caused immediate loss of consciousness, no convulsions, no struggle, no survival response. Such a conclusion was considered speculative. It was never pursued. The officer who spoke off record, years later, a retired officer, gave an anonymous interview. He said something that never appeared in any official account. We treated it like a problem to be closed, not a mystery to be understood. He admitted investigators felt outmatched, not threatened. Outmatched. The unasked question, one officially asked, what if the men were right but unprepared? What if their belief was incorrect only in magnitude? What if the phenomenon they anticipated was real, but lethal? That question was never written down. The silence from the group, members of the informal electronic spiritual circle, stopped meeting after the deaths. No memorial, no continuation, no attempts to repeat the experiment, which suggests they learned something. Not from success, from failure. The fear of contamination. One rumor persisted quietly, that some officers avoided prolonged exposure to the site, not out of superstition, out of instinct. They reported headaches, disorientation, nothing measurable, nothing reportable, just enough to leave. Why these details matter. Individually, none of these fragments prove anything. Together, they form a pattern: sudden sensory phenomena, and neurological effects, environmental anomalies, to missing data. A pattern that was too unstable to preserve. At the final unofficial conclusion, among researchers who later reviewed everything, including what was missing, a grim consensus formed. The men were not insane. They were not deceived by others. They were not murdered. They encountered something they did not understand, something they believed could be managed, controlled, survived. They were wrong. The case that teaches one silent lesson. The lead mask's mystery endures not because it proves the existence of something extraordinary, but because it exposes the danger of certainty. Two intelligent men trusted their preparation more than their limits, and the system that found them trusted silence more than truth. In part 8, we reach the end, not with answers, but with meaning. Why this case still matters, why it refuses to die, and why some mysteries are not unsolved, but unsolvable. Final analysis. Why the lead mask's case still haunts us. Some mysteries fade with time, details blur, witnesses disappear, interest dies. The lead mask's case did the opposite. It hardened. Because it does not behave like a crime. It does not behave like a tragedy. And it does not behave like a myth. It behaves like a boundary. Not a question of what, but why. Most unsolved cases ask, who did it? How did it happen? The lead mask's case asks something far more uncomfortable. Why were two rational men willing to risk everything for an unseen moment? And why were they so certain they were prepared? The illusion of control. Manoel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana were not reckless. They calculated, they timed, they protected, they followed procedure. This is the psychology of engineers, not dreamers. And that is precisely what makes the case disturbing. Because it reveals a universal human flaw, the belief that understanding something means controlling it. Knowledge without context is dangerous. They understood lead blocks radiation. They understood electromagnetic shielding. They understood timing. But understanding components is not the same as understanding systems. Whatever they expected did not follow human logic, did not scale to human safety, did not respect preparation. The silence that followed was intentional. The case was not buried because it was impossible. It was buried because it was destabilizing. It undermined institutional authority, scientific confidence, the idea that unexplained equals harmless. Better to call it suicide. Better to call it accident. Better to close the file. Why no one repeated the experiment. This may be the most important detail of all. No one ever tried again. Not the group. Not researchers. Not imitators. Which suggests the knowledge that mattered was not written down. It was learned. And it was enough to stop further attempts. A case without a villain. There is no murderer to hate. No criminal to punish. No entity to confront. Only human belief colliding with the unknown, and losing. The masks as a metaphor. The lead masks were not just objects. They were symbols. Of humanity's attempt to shield itself from consequences while reaching for forbidden understanding. Of thinking partial protection is enough. Of assuming danger can be filtered. Why this case refuses to die. Because it asks a question modern society still avoids. What happens when curiosity outruns caution? We like mysteries with endings. This one has none. The possibility no one can dismiss. Perhaps nothing extraordinary happened. Perhaps the men died due to a rare physiological event, a misjudged chemical reaction, a perfect storm of coincidence. That explanation is allowed, but it is not comforting, because even that version implies two men followed logic and still crossed a line they couldn't see. The last image that remains point two bodies, side by side, eyes covered, facing upward, waiting, not fleeing, not fighting, not resisting, waiting. The final question. The lead masks case does not ask us to believe in aliens, conspiracies, or the paranormal. It asks something simpler. What would you be willing to risk if you were absolutely certain you were right? Why Echo Frame tells this story? Because this is not a story about the past. It is a story about human limits and the danger of believing they don't exist.